Hi there. So this is a real tactical talk about how to set up your CSM operations. And I don't think I'm actually going to be telling you anything that you haven't already heard in these last 2 days. So before I talk about the 4 steps of how you set up your CSM operations, I want to take a little walk through history and talk about technology. And we know that technology evolves through these set of cycles that span about 20 years. And at the beginning of the last century, we were in what is known as the age of manufacturing. This was followed by the age of distribution. Then, most recently, we were in the age of information, which was characterized by connected PCs and those efficient supply chains that Malcolm Gladwell talked about this morning, and the companies that controlled the information flow dominated in this age. And then social media came along and did a great job at disrupting this age and ushering in what we at Forrester, we call the age of the customer. And what this means is that the customer, like all of you here in this room, you control the conversation that you have with companies that you do business with. And so what does this mean for companies? Is companies have to become a lot more obsessed in delivering engagement experiences in line with customer expectations in order to garner their satisfaction and their long-term loyalty. So what has also happened, and all of you know this, is that we have moved to a subscription economy. We don't buy products anymore as large capital expenditures. Many times we subscribe to services because it's a much more attractive model, as monthly operational costs are much easier to rationalize than large capital expenditures. And look around you. There's a whole set of services that are available via subscription. Here, media, entertainment, Netflix, Hulu, iTunes, Spotify. You think of even shipping as a service with Amazon Prime, or transportation as a service with Zipcar, or even personal health and beauty supplies by Birchbox that are delivered to your door on a monthly basis, or even groceries where you get ingredients for meals that are delivered to you on a weekly basis via Blue Apron. And nowhere is this move to a subscription economy more apparent than in software, and especially in B2B software. And so here's some data from Forrester for you. And this is what's happening in the enterprise organization, these large companies, where 14% of large enterprises already are using the software as a service delivery model for much of their software. Another 21% are expanding their SaaS footprint within an organization. And 13% are looking to move to SaaS delivery technology this year. And these statistics are even greater in mid-sized businesses and in small businesses where software is predominantly deployed as a service. And then you look at even certain technology categories within B2B software. And we see that certain technologies have tipped to the SaaS delivery model. And what you're looking at here is a maturity model that helps exemplify this. So you think of Salesforce automation technologies, human capital management technologies, learning, purchasing, e-purchasing technologies have already moved to the SaaS delivery model. There's other software categories like customer service software, IT service management software, marketing automation, collaboration technologies that are moving to the SaaS delivery model. And then there's a few of those laggards, few technology categories that are still firmly embedded and meshed in the old heavyweight on-premise delivery model. And because all these software categories are moving to a subscription model, the way that you manage customer relationships has changed. So think back to when you ended up buying products as a large capital expenditure. As a company, you spent a lot of effort focusing on making the sale. And then you walked away from the customer. And you didn't know how the customer was using it. You didn't even know if the customer had actually turned on the software. And you definitely didn't know if they were realizing economic value, economic benefit of their purchase. Now, in a subscription economy, managing the long-term relationship becomes much more important because the barriers to churn are so low. And then why do you really care about managing customer relationships? It's because a satisfied customer correlates to a loyal customer. And a loyal customer is one who is apt to buy another product from your company. It's one who's going to stay true to your brand for a longer engagement time. And it's one who will act as an advocate for your products and services to their business network. So many companies are realizing, as you know, the economic value of customer success management and are putting in programs in place to actively manage these relationships for 3 reasons: to help reduce churn, to increase existing revenue, and to be advocates, to influence new sales. And the economic benefit of these 3 points can be really easily calculated. You can calculate the return on investment in investing in a customer success management program by looking at your churn numbers, by looking at your increased cross-sells and upsells, at the impact of a CSM team being able to intervene with a greater number of at-risk customers. Or you can quantify the impact of being able to increase your customer outreach activities to help deepen customer engagement. So the real takeaway from this is that you're investing in customer relationships because it has real economic value to your company. So the question that we get very often is, we understand the value of having CSM teams, but how do you actually get started? And so what we did at Forrester in partnership with Gainsight is that we surveyed close to 20 customer success executives to figure out what their successes were, how they implemented CSM programs, what was working well for them, and what were the challenges that they ended up facing. And what we found was that most companies found it pretty easy to set up a CSM organization and then to operationally manage that CSM team. Where they had more difficulty was trying to find the right skill set, that right profile of a customer success manager or an executive, or measuring the effectiveness of the team and the ROI that they were delivering to the company. And every single company that we interviewed fell down when it came to empowering their CSM managers with the right data to be able to drive the right conversations with their customers. So, what we've learned is that to be successful with customer success management takes discipline in 4 areas. It's having the right engagement strategy, choosing the right engagement processes, then hiring and managing the CSM team, which here I'm calling the engagers, and then empowering your CSM team with the right data to have those conversations, those value-added conversations with your customer to help them realize the economic value of their software purchase. So, let's start off by looking at these 4 dimensions. And I want to start off by looking at what we mean by the engagement strategy. So, how you engage with customers is dependent on where you are in your company's growth trajectory. When you're a new company and you're starting off, what are you focused on? You're focused on acquiring customers and getting them to use your product. So you're focused on adoption, retention activities. As your company grows and you have a significant number of customers, of course you're focused on retaining those customers, but your product portfolio may grow. And you start being focused on finding the right cross-sells and upsells to make into your installed base. And then when you're a mature organization, mid-sized or large organization, and you have a significant number of customers, you are focused on being able to engage with the most profitable customers as efficiently as possible. And then you look at being deeply embedded with your strategic customers in order to help transform their operations. So, irrespective of where you are in your company's growth trajectory, you want to tier your customers, and you want to have different engagement strategies based on your customer tier, because unfortunately, you can't treat all your customers in the same way. So at the top of your pyramid, you've got your strategic accounts, and these are your accounts. They may be your biggest deals, or they may be your accounts that are really important to you from a marketing or from a PR perspective. And at the bottom of the pyramid, you've got your value accounts. And these are your accounts that don't have any significance to you, but they have minimal significance to you. They may be your very small accounts, or they may be have very little importance to you in your advocacy outreaches or in your marketing and PR campaigns. And the way that you engage with each of these tiers, again, irrespective of where you are in your company's growth trajectory, is going to be different. Your strategic accounts, you want to be deeply embedded with them. And you want to have personalized conversations at all levels of the organizations, from the users to IT to mid-level executives, even to the C-level executives. And you want to be deeply penetrated in those accounts. Your value accounts, it shouldn't really say no touch. It's not that you don't want to touch them, but you don't have the bandwidth to have that deep personalized touch with those accounts. And how you want to communicate with those accounts is by relying on those one-to-many types of communications, like email, like newsletters, like webinars, best practice webinars, that communicate, for example, domain information or expertise. So again, your engagement strategy will depend on your customer tier, and again, where you are in your in the growth trajectory of your company. So this takes us to the next level, or to the next area of focus, which are your engagement processes. And again, for every account type, whether they're your strategic accounts, your commercial, your value accounts, however you tier your customers, you want to define and you want to use standard engagement processes. So, for example, onboarding, product adoption. You want to standardize the information that you get about product usage. Who's using your products? Who is not? What users did you provision that aren't active? What features are being used? Are your stickiest product features being used? And if they're not, what do you do about them? And who engages with the customer to help drive product adoption? You look at best practice education, because one of the great benefits of customer success management organizations is that you bring best practice and domain expertise to your customers, and you help grow them in their level of maturity. So you have to sit down with them and understand, what's the business goal of your customer? Then what value, what's the economic value that they're getting from your product? And look at how they're using the product. And are they aligned to best practices, to product best practices, or even to domain best practices? Then you want to look at how do you engage with your customers, with your strategic customers. For example, you may want to have your quarterly business reviews, but for your value customers, don't you also want to email them a scorecard on how they're doing? Don't you want to be able to get alerts on how they're using the product and if their product usage is increasing or decreasing? And again, you want to look at your processes and standardize the processes to quantify and to communicate the business value that your software is delivering to your customer. And then you want to look at processes around managing your at-risk customers. And step back and think, do you even have a standard definition of what an at-risk customer is? Is it somebody who bought the product and never used it, or provisioned 100 users and there's only 20 users that are actually active using the product? Is it a customer who is contacting you with questions or who is filing a number of support tickets? Or is it a customer who used to engage with you and has suddenly gone dark? So what is your definition of risk? And then when that little alert pops up that says, hey, this customer is at risk, what do you do about it? What are the processes that you follow? What's the timeline that you need to follow, that you need to stick to engage with those at-risk customers? And then who is responsible for managing that customer? Again, this morning we talked about swarming around a customer and the customer feeling overwhelmed by having so many touch points. You don't want that to happen. You want to have clear levels or clear lines of accountability and of communication. So defining not only the engagement process for your at-risk customer, but who in the organization is responsible for the next action to be able to save that customer. Then you want to think about the engagers. So these are your customer success managers, your CSM organization. This is the team that's responsible for ensuring the success of your products within a company, to get them to realize the economic value that they are getting from having bought your product. And surveying all of you, we found that there is no set title for a customer success manager. They can be called account managers, they can be called advocacy coaches, they can be called customer experience managers. There's a whole set of titles for this role of being able to ensure your customer's success. But irrespective of the title, they all have the same goal. And to make sure that they're successful, that this team is successful, as Nick Mehta said, is that they have to be empowered at the executive level. They have to be supported by executive management. They have to be given a clear charter, and there has to be a clear measure of their success, which tends to be a retention measure. So if you look at where the CSM team sits in an organization, what we found with all the interviews that we did formally with Gainsight, as well as all the informal conversations that I've had with you here, is that we tend to find that they typically reside in 3 places in the organization. They can be in sales, they can be in customer service, and they also can be in an operations group. But again, there's many different flavors of organizational models, and this is because the role is evolving. It's a new role. And what we think is that as this role matures and becomes more standard in organizations, a standard organizational hierarchy will emerge. It's just we're not there yet. So if the CSM team lives in sales, we tend to find this in early stage companies that are growing. We tend to also find this when the products that are being sold are not all that complicated. And even if the CSM team lives in the sales organization, there is a clear delineation between the hunters and the farmers. And the CSM team is responsible for the ongoing success of the installed base. They're not responsible for farming activities. They may be responsible for renewals, but what we find that they're gold on is typically on retention and on expansion measures. So customer churn, as well as incremental revenue from cross-sells and upsells. So, if the CSM team lives in the customer service organization, we tend to find this when the product that is being supported is pretty complicated, where the CSM team becomes the trusted advisor for the customer. And the CSM has product knowledge and they have domain expertise. They're not necessarily coders, but they know how to use the product to a pretty deep level. And they become that trusted advisor to the company. And they're responsible for working with the customer to ensure their success. If the customer has an issue or a roadblock, they tend to be the front door. They tend to be the first person that the customer calls, and they're responsible for triaging that issue and then routing it to the right place in the organization so that it can get resolved. It could be to customer support as a trouble ticket. It could be to the education group for additional training or coaching. It could even be an issue with a product feature. If this team is in customer service, they're not responsible for sales activities, but they work hand in hand with sales. So what that means is that they can be responsible for finding cross-sell and upsell and expansion opportunities, and then taking those opportunities and handing them off to sales for them to close. They're not responsible for closing the sale. And we don't find a standard measure of success if this group is within customer service. They can be gold on renewals, revenue expansion, retention, but again, in all our interviews, we didn't find a clear measure of success when this group resided in the customer service organization. We also find that CSM teams can live in the operations group. And the company profile of companies that have the CSM team within operations is companies that are more mature, are larger, and support a more complex product. And if the CSM team lives within operations, there's a very clear delineation of responsibility between sales, who are responsible for new sales, customer service, who's responsible for tech support, and then operations, who's responsible for the ongoing success of their installed base. And here we did find a clear measure of success. They tend to be all gold on customer retention. They may be gold on other measures as well, but every CSM team who lived in an operations group were all gold on customer retention. So, what makes a good customer success manager? This is really important because the success of your team will be dependent on hiring the right profile for the job. So I always think of a CSM, a customer success manager, as an account manager who brings to the table domain expertise. And they can work at all levels of the organization. So that means that they're a senior level person. They're not a junior level person. And here, they have this energy, this passion for serving customers. They're good at building relationships, again, at all levels within the organization. They are able to listen to the customer, understand what the customer is saying, both explicitly and implicitly. They're well organized. They can take what the customer is saying and act on it, making sure that that customer is successful with their product. They're good at conflict resolution. They have this proactive can-do attitude. Let me build out the slide. They're technical enough. They're not coders, but they have to know the product to a certain level to have that credibility with their end users. And what many CSM teams bring to the table is best practice knowledge and domain expertise, because many young companies starting off may not necessarily know best practices and may not be experts in their actual domain. And so they want to learn from the CSMs how to best manage their operations to ensure that their customers are successful. Okay. Lastly, let's talk about the data that makes customer success managers successful. And then having the right data, well, obviously it's going to make or break your operations. It's going to allow the CSMs to have the right data-driven conversations with their customers to ensure their ongoing success. So data comes from all over the place. You need customer data. So you want to start off by understanding, what's your customer actually trying to do? What's their business goal? What's their measure of success? When they buy your product, what's their measure of success? How are they calculating the ROI? You want to understand what features do they need to use to be able to have them be successful in their operations. You want to understand their onboarding process, how many users they bought. Are the provisioned users all active, or are there inactive users? What's the call volume? What's the ticket volume? What's the interaction volume that that customer has with your organization? You want financial details about their contract, the terms and conditions of their contract. You want to understand what products or features that they bought and what ones are they actually using. Are they using everything that they bought, or are they using features that they did not buy, which could be a potential for having that data-driven conversation to say, hey, we need to upsell you, or we need to expand your license because you're using all these capabilities that weren't in your initial contract. You want to understand if your customer is realizing the economic value of their investment. You want to understand what feedback they're giving about the product that they bought. You want to get this via direct customer feedback by surveying them, by asking support, getting feedback from your customer support team. And then you also want to understand what they're saying about you in social media. Are they advocates or are they detractors? And then you also want to understand if there's any alerts that have kicked off, early warning signs of customer unhappiness. Okay? And this is just a small subset of data that you may use to be able to build that health metric, that 360-degree view of the customer. So let me build out this slide. So what do you do with this data? First of all, you have to figure out, very tactically, where this data resides. This customer data, the financial data, feedback data, support data. Where does it all live within your company? What back-end systems do you have to tap into? What front-end systems do you have to tap into? How do you integrate all these systems to get all this data in one place? And then if you have two pieces of data, you have to figure out what one's right, what one's wrong. What data validation algorithms do you need to run to make sure that the data that the CSM team is using is good data? And then you just don't want to get a whole bunch of data. You want to be able to visualize that data so that the CSM team can easily understand what that data is telling you. And then yesterday, we talked about data science. And you want to use all that data science to look at this enormous amount of data and to explore it and see if there's any correlations or any predictions that you can make on the customer data that you can have. And then, for example, we've talked about cross-sells and upsells, and what's the definition of an at-risk customer, and what are the alerts and notifications that you need to set on all this piles of data that you are mining to get insights from. And then when you have these insights, like, hey, this is a customer that may be at risk, or hey, this is a customer that we could sell product X to, you need to be able to kick these insights off into a workflow so that the CSM manager shows up in the morning and gets a notification in their email that tells them what to do and then how to engage with that customer. And then you want to start small. You want to start by getting really good at getting all this customer data in one place and building out your processes and building out your alerts and notifications. And once you get good at operationally using this data to engage with your customers, you may want to start sharing this data with other organizations within your company, like finding your customer advocates and then letting marketing know that there are these sets of advocates that they can use in sales activities or marketing activities. And then at some point, when you're really good at being able to synthesize that customer data and share it across an organization, you may want to start expanding your customer's profile to not only include data that you're gathering about them on how they're using your product, but perhaps looking at data about them from external sources, like social media sites, like LinkedIn, and adding it to enhance your customer profile. So, to sum it up, we know we've moved to a subscription economy, where managing customer relationships is key to your company's success. Why do you want to manage customer relationships? It's because customer relationships have a real economic value. And the return on investment of actively managing your customers and building good relationships and ensuring their success can be quantified. It can be quantified by reducing churn, by looking at the increased numbers of cross-sells and upsells. It can be quantified by looking at advocacy measures. But to do so is really hard. To actively manage your customers, it's really hard. And it's not about buying a platform. It's not just about data. It's not just about hiring account managers. It's a combination of 4 dimensions. It's having the right engagement strategy that's based on your company's growth trajectory, where you are in that trajectory. It's based on what tier your customer is in. Having the right processes, standardized processes based on customer tiers. It's about hiring the right profile for a customer success manager. And it's about empowering these customer success managers with the right data to have those data-driven conversations with your customer to be able to quantify their success. And that's all I had to say.